So all about therapy tonight. We have the therapeutic experts on the night. We're going to tackle these critical issues that shape our society and find solutions. You know, let me start with Dr. Plummer, Dr. LaNail Plummer, as we talk about this issue of therapy. You know, I think the first thing is that people need to learn how their mind works, and then it helps you develop a greater understanding of yourself.
That's right.
Talk about that.
Absolutely. So mental health, oftentimes people want to separate physical health from mental health, but forgetting that it's all one body. So the things that we eat, the things that we drink all affect our mental health. The things that we see, the things that we experience, our sensory elements are all part of our mental health. So when people are talking about, say, depression or anxiety, it's not just a matter of their circumstances have gotten really challenging or tough. It's also a matter of, when we think about it for medication, what they're consuming and how do we regulate the chemicals that's in their body. Some of this is passed down by genetics, of course, and some of it is learned behaviors from our families. If we have a parent who is depressed but who's never been treated properly for that depression, we then begin to think that the ways that they are moving and living in life is normal, and we mimic that as well. So there's some learned behaviors that's connected to mental health. There's some chemical behaviors or chemical responses that are related to mental health. There's some environmental factors that are related to mental health too, but we have to be mindful that it's all part of our one body. And so it's important to me to highlight that consistently, because people oftentimes want to separate physical health from mental health. If you take a person with a physical health ailment, but you don't necessarily treat their mental health, say diabetes for instance, if a person has depression and diabetes, if you don't treat the depression, the diabetes doesn't get better, right? And so that's a connection to the mental health and the physical health, and seeing it all as one. And there's tons of things, and I hope we get to talk about it tonight, Armstrong, about the different ways we can take care of our bodies and how that can help our mental health as well.
let me have Samantha Silverman join this conversation. You know, I think one of the things, you know, I read a lot, and because of what I do, Ms. Silverman, I interact with a lot of people. I talk with a lot of people. I think what people have difficulty in is managing very difficult emotional challenges, like depression, like anger, like loss. To be able to manage that can really overwhelm them. What can you share with our national audience now? How can they better manage these very difficult emotional challenges, which are going to come? Nobody can escape it.
Yeah.
Sure. Hello there. I believe that grounding techniques would be a really wonderful place to start in managing those extreme emotions. If somebody is not in a safe, grounded area, they can have these extreme emotional reactions. And in order to be grounded, I tell all of my clients to practice deep breathing, to practice relaxation skills such as yoga, jogging, exercise, and to really work out of a place where they can be grounded prior to dealing with these extreme emotional reactions.
Let me go to you, LaNail. You know, how do we help people? You got to help people build healthier habits.
Absolutely.
I think habits is something that is very important. How do you learn to build healthier habits and sort of navigate your mindset at the same time? Because all of it is about a mindset.
Right, absolutely.
No, I'm sorry, my bad.
Oh.
I'm going to Phillip Lewis. I'm sorry.
Phillip, yes, to create a healthy mindset is being very specific and what you're first identifying what you're trying to change, and then setting a small, measurable, and obtainable goal to change that thing. And understanding that sometimes things are simple as creating a new behavior pattern to change or adjust your mood. So these changes that you're trying to make could take some time. We like to say that, oh, I go to therapy once or twice, or have done the counting or the breathing, or did the journal for a week, and my symptoms have only change for just a bit, not significantly. But the way the brain works, we sometimes have to create enough of a habit that these things become autonomous, and then we can challenge or overcome these difficult situations or experiences that we may have automatically. Just like a negative thought might come up in my mind automatically because I've spent some time beating myself up. I might have to spend some time uplifting or affirming myself in order for those positive thoughts to now become automatic as well.
So Dr. Donohue, you know, one thing that you have to learn in life is about adaptability. They're willing to adjust to change. How do people cope and deal with difficult changes that they face in their lives, and how that contribute to mental health challenges?
Well, Armstrong, first, thanks for including me in this very important conversation. You know, I've had the experience over the years that people in general do adapt. People want to go from less well to more well. And our job in terms of mild to moderate mental illness is to, in a sense, chaperone that effort. Severe mental illness is a different thing entirely. And I think that all our guests this evening would agree that severe mental illness, which principally here means bipolar affective disorder, schizophrenia, and severe depression, those are really things that are best dealt with medically. But it's interesting that in the annals of psychiatry, the number of diagnoses has really recently skyrocketed, and it's been a source of some controversy, Armstrong, because in the more recent DSM manuals, the manuals of psychiatric diseases that are recognized and described, a whole number of rather mild diseases have kind of come to the fore, but the really critical, disastrous, and catastrophic illnesses, again, like schizophrenia and bipolar disease, have to some extent been eclipsed. So I think there's a great deal of room for making wise life choices in managing the kinds of things that you all have been talking about, depression, anxiety, and so forth. But really the crisis that we face now is in those more calamitous circumstances where mental health resources are strained. There's 30,000 psychiatrists today practicing in America. Just think about that. There's 330 million people. So there's very, very few psychiatric physicians. So we really find ourselves in a bit of a tough spot there. And I think there's lots of room to move to improve our performance.
So, you know, Dr. Plummer, if there is one thing that impacts mental health, in my opinion, more than anything else, it's relationships and how you manage those relationships with your children, with your parents, with your friends, with your coworkers, with strangers. You can just meet a stranger, and depending on how the conversation go, it can put you into an emotional roller coaster, or with your partners. And it does surprise me. I have to tell you, it surprises me how much what others think about you can really impact you. I'm not going to say that's a weakness on behalf of a person that allows that to impact them. But I think one of the things that we really have to delve into here tonight is sort of guiding people how to better manage their relationships. And then some relationships are so toxic, you just don't need to be in that relationship. It's just not good for you.
Yes, agreed, absolutely. I do think that it's important for people to pay attention to relationships and how they manage those relationships. You know, from a theoretical perspective, we could think about it in terms of attachment, how those early childhood formations with their primary caregivers, including their parents, were formed. Were their parents paying attention to them? Did they create an anxious type of personality? Did they create an avoidant type of personality? Was it completely disorganized? We find from a theoretical perspective and a clinical perspective that those types of relationships will recur over and over again as a matter of pattern. And so what those early relationships may have looked like, we'll see it repeated in early friendships. We see it repeated in their relationships with their significant others and their spouses, and even their relationships with their coworkers. There's a lot that we can learn in those processes as well. So the attachment that we're referring to can actually be corrected, but it does take a lot of intentionality. And if it is in the childhood, it can take intentionality from the parents and from their teachers. But as we grow older, we can take more ownership in those processes as well. I appreciate that we're having a conversation about therapy, because therapy is one of those places where we can correct those behaviors, where we have increased awareness of what we're doing and why we're doing it, where we're uncovering the roots to determine how we became who we are, and then deciding who we want to be in the next rendition of our lives. So the therapy can help in significant ways and in breaking cycles for the next generation. So there may have been an insecure attachment between a parent and a child, but once that child becomes an adult, they can have the skills and the resources to make the situation better for themselves and their children as well. I do believe that our school systems have some responsibility in that as well. We've taken out a significant part of social emotional learning in the schools, and we're slowly trying to integrate that in as well. But it's important to note that children need explicit language and communication and lessons around social skills, around emotional intelligence, around self-awareness. While we understand that math and history and English as subjects are extremely important, a person lives with themselves for the rest of their lives. So there may be math formulas that they forget about, but they won't forget about how to access their own awareness. There may be particular science formulas that they forget, but they don't necessarily forget how to interact with another person in a disagreement. And so it's important that we reintroduce social emotional learning as a consistent subject matter in our schools.
You know, Ms. Summers, another conclusion I've reached, I really think physical health is so important to deal with. I think when you deal with this physical health, you know, people with this chronic pain, they have these sleep disorders, yes. and it goes back to physical health. Could you speak to that? Ms. Summers. Silverman, I'm sorry. Samantha Silverman, I'm sorry.
That's okay, and I apologize. I cannot see the other participants on my screen, so I thought perhaps there was a Miss Summers. So in order to address mental health, you have to address the underlying cause of your physical health conditions. I know one of your participants was speaking to this a few minutes ago and talking about how mental health and physical health are so closely intertwined.
Hold that about how close intertwined, because I can tell you about to really get real deep on us, and I know we're coming up on a break, so what I'm gonna do, we're gonna go to break, pay some bills, and we're gonna come straight back to you. Okay? Don't you go away. We're coming back. It's mental health tonight. So we're talking about this emotional and psychological component of physical health and the things that it can lead to: chronic pain, it can lead to sleep disorder. And Samantha Silverman was about to talk about this as we're going out to break. So Samantha, please continue.
Sure. So the big issue here is that 83 million Americans do not have a primary care provider. And that can be a combination of either not having insurance or not having the financial means. And out of everybody who cannot access the PCP, those are the people that have the most difficult health conditions to treat. So if you can't get a grasp on your physical health conditions, you can't start treating your mental health condition.
You know, Dr. Donohue, it is a fact that therapy can help you increase your productivity.
It is indeed, and as my colleagues this evening have pointed out, there's lots of arrows in the quiver, lots of ways for us to go from less happy to more happy. You talked just a second ago with Samantha about exercise. It's interesting that from the medical perspective, it turns out that 3 hours of exercise a week predictably results in a 40% all-cause mortality reduction. Just think about that for a second. So it turns out that exercise as an independent variable has been well studied and has a great bearing on overall sense of well-being and the elusive product of happiness. Turns out that certain forms of meditation have been looked at. In fact, one form was recently recognized by the American Heart Association as a useful therapeutic for reducing high blood pressure. So there's lots of ways for us to do what we were told to do in 2 Corinthians and steward the body. It's interesting to think, though, of happiness as an endpoint. If we took the founders of the nation literally and actually set about to pursue happiness, to chase it like the hound of heaven, I think we would find that lots of the things that my colleagues have spoken about are useful predicates. Leading a good, balanced life, up in the morning early, exercising in the morning, keeping calories within a certain time frame, not weighing a pound more than what we all weighed or should have weighed at 21. These are the basic kind of guardrails of life, and we can all see that most of us have some work to do to get to those endpoints.
You know, Phillip, I tell you, when you think about mental health and what people endure every day, it seems like they've got a pill, a drug for everything. Let's just medicate everything. You know, I am so proud when I say to people, and I use myself as an example, I have not taken any kind of medicine in over 35 years. None, okay? I exercise, I watch what I eat, and yes, sometimes I have surgery, I'm in pain, but I endure it because I don't want to take medicine. And I know some people need the medicine, I know you need to balance it out, but don't you think we've become an over-medicated society with everything therapy? And how do people balance this out when not to go overboard with the medication?
Right. Statistically, we have, right? That's what the numbers show. However, I do want to make sure that everyone knows that there's nothing wrong with medication, particularly when it comes to stabilization. So
only for me there's something wrong.
Well,
with it,
maybe.
I'm just an exception, not the rule.
For
okay.
those of us who have had privileged lives to be able to make time to work out, to have sustaining healthy families, to have been taught coping mechanisms for emotional or physical pain, absolutely, you may not need medication for stabilization. Some who weren't as blessed to get those things or have those experiences, or may have had a life that has exposed them to other things that say you cannot help yourself, that you may need intervention from someone else, whether that's a traumatic experience or a socioeconomic experience.
And that doesn't make a person weak, by the way.
It doesn't, no, absolutely not.
Absolutely
not. So when it comes to medication, it's important when we're prescribing or when we're counseling to sometimes distinguish whether this is something that is going to be long-term or something that is to help right now to stabilize whatever physiological or psychological symptoms are presenting. So that way in therapy we can process what's going on to build those skills that you may not have gotten or been able to build earlier on in life. And then once you have that, once you have honed these skills and these techniques to make sure you no longer need it, now we can wean you off, or now we can transition you to more nutritional psychiatry as opposed to pharmaceuticals. So I would agree that yes, over time we have increased the prescriptions and the pills that have been accessible for mental health. But again, we want to be mindful that there's nothing wrong with that. Two, there are some people who may need temporary stability in order to get the skills that you already have, that you mentioned with your morning routine and working out and never having to take anything for the 30 years. Until they get there, then that's us, how we can work in the gap, work in that gap.
How does faith in God and prayer fit into this?
I think faith in anything is beneficial, because what that means is I have the capacity to understand that this will get better. And for some people, that's religion. For some people, that is a practice. For some people, that's a therapist, that's a family member, that's a child, that's a school, that's a goal. It can be a lot of things. But as long as someone has the understanding and the willingness to change, whatever way they find it, I think that's the starting point. And then everything else can help. Everything else can be a tool. There are a lot of things outside of a therapeutic office that can be therapeutic. Does that make sense?
Of course it makes sense, because it makes sense. Now, I want to come to you on something else, Dr. Plummer. Can you explain for us, I'm pivoting to somewhere else here tonight, the connection between mental health issues and homelessness based on your experience at Onyx Therapy Group?
Absolutely. And I think I can make a good connection there based off of what we also just heard from Phillip. One of the things that I heard him talk about specifically was access, right? So we need to be able to have access. And so in your situation, you have access to a gym, a safe gym, maybe some healthy food.
But I don't need a gym. I can go outside. I can exercise right in my house. I don't need anything. People just make excuses.
And maybe that's also because you live in a neighborhood that feels really safe and secure for you.
But
maybe
you can do it in your home. You can do 50 push-ups.
Yes, you can.
You can do jumping jacks.
Yes,
you can do the jumping rope.
You can do those things. What I'm saying, however, is that access is important, right? And so we need to be able to, I think about physical pain, where I had an injury from being in the military, a knee injury. And I could have easily taken pain medication, but instead I went to an acupuncturist so that I could get the support that I needed there, also covered by my insurance. But it meant that I had to understand what acupuncture was. It meant that I had to go find a place. It meant that I had to interview a place. All of that is time consuming, far more time consuming than medication can be. And so where we hear Phillip saying, like, yes, indeed, the country is being, there's more people taking medication than there has in the past, there's a lot of additional reasons for that, including a lack of access. And that's a systemic issue that I believe as well. So making that connection into homelessness, you know, a lot of folks connect mental health to homelessness as if everyone that is homeless has a mental health issue. And that's not necessarily the case. In fact, we understand through our research that about 20 to 25% of people who identify as homeless or who are homeless have a mental health issue, versus 6% of the population who has a mental health issue that it's not homeless. So we're looking at about a 14% gap that's there. So while we recognize that there are more people that are homeless that have mental health issues than the general population, we also have to understand that some of that has to do with learned behavior, some of that has to do with systems, some of that has to do with substance use disorders, and all of those things may also be contributing to the lack of opportunity to maintain employment and maintain a good economic standing, so they can't maintain their households and pay their bills. And so we recognize that mental health is a factor, but it's not the only factor that's related to homelessness in particular. From our clients that we have in Onyx, we recognize that one of the major elements that contribute to homelessness is a lack of family support. And I see that, and having done mental health around the world, having the opportunity to do mental health services in Europe, in the continent of Africa, in South America, recognizing that our systems, our family systems, are so disjointed at times and so individualized that when we recognize that we have a family member that has a mental health disorder, we're likely to put them off. And that starts early on in our special education classes and exclusive classes and things like that. But we recognize that in this country, when somebody is quote unquote different, or they're dealing with a different mental health issue, we put them off to the side and we keep pushing them further and further and further away. And then of course we have results such as homelessness.
Let me get Samantha. You know, we're packing so much into this conversation today. And I want you to respond to some of what you're listening to, because you know you speak in sound bites, 2 seconds, and everybody's just speaking 2 or 3 minutes. So I want to hear more from you, okay? I want this to be balanced here, because you notice I don't cut anybody off. I just let them talk. So I want to hear you talk, okay? You know, in addition to, how do systemic barriers such as lack of access to social services contribute to the overlap of mental health challenges and homelessness, and anything else you want to add in listening to this conversation, Ms. Silverman?
Sure. So we need economic support so greatly in terms of housing unhoused individuals. And one of your participants said a few minutes ago that it's not always that they have a mental health issue. I believe the statistics are correct that 20% of unhoused individuals do have a severe mental health issue, but that's not the case for all of them. Inflation is rising, the cost of housing is rising, and one of the systemic issues that we have is just a lack of housing. And whether that housing could be buildings going up in communities. For instance, I know there's a project in Cleveland that's happening right now where they are converting a downtown historic building into a permanent homeless community. And whether it's creative facets like that or finding more permanent housing, that would greatly solve the issue of people that are facing homelessness right now.
You know, Dr. Donohue, I think all of us are probably old enough to remember when the streets were both safe and clean. Now often they're neither in communities today. We see homeless communities just about everywhere. I don't care where you go in this country, that's what you see. Has homelessness grown, and if so, why?
Well, Armstrong, you know, here's the data. So homelessness was kind of a rare disease, if you will, before the 1980s, and there were several reasons why it kind of burgeoned into the American experience in that time frame. We remember that institutions for people with severe mental illness were largely closed, so so-called deinstitutionalization occurred. We had Vietnam War veterans back, and so homelessness really kind of entered the American psyche in an earnest way in the 1980s. On the other hand, it has burgeoned since then. If you look at the data from just 23 to 24, just over the last year, just in that 1 year, there's been a fully 12% increase in homelessness.
Oh.
The facts that surround it are that probably tonight, across the country, there are 550,000 to 600,000 individuals sleeping under bridge easements and behind dumpsters. So the short answer is yes, it has. It has increased, and all of us with eyes to see and ears to hear know that's the case.
And we'll be back. Your voice, your future. Don't go away.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. And welcome back to the broadcast. So, Phillip, so drug addiction and mental illness together led to the explosion of homelessness that we see in so many of our areas, especially urban areas across our country today. What can be done about this from your experiences? And we all see the problem, but what are the solutions?
One solution is a Housing First initiative. So we saw that in New York and places like Utah, there was a significant decrease, like 91% decrease in homelessness, chronic homelessness, when implementing programs like Housing First. And what that is basically is there are no predeterminants or drug tests or anything like that to get secure housing. And once you are securely housed, then you can work on the behavioral, biological, or psychological things that have impacted your need to use a substance for emotional pain or for a chronic condition or for a substance misuse disorder. But historically, we move away from that kind of model, and it's more if you pop hot or fail a drug test or use, then you lose all your social services. And sometimes people are using because they don't have social services. I'm exposed to anxiety or trauma about sleeping on the street for some women. Sleeping on the street. For some women, that creates chronic anxiety for safety. How do I soothe that? By smoking something, by getting something that can soothe my emotional pain to help me sleep. Because I don't know who's coming which way or whatnot. I have no shelter, no physical shelter, and there's a risk to my physical personhood, my body, for being here and sleeping on the concrete or wherever we're sleeping. So it's what our society is always like, well, if you're using, then you shouldn't have these services. But they forget that sometimes the lack of services cause the chronic or immediate substance use issues or chronic mental health disorders.
You know, Samantha, I'm listening to Phillip here. I mean, can we admit that in some ways the government has failed this population? That there are better ways to do this and that we should learn what has worked from the mistakes of the past, but yet we don't want to move forward, which is what is desperately needed to give these people the best chance of conquering and kicking this habit and putting it behind them. But what about the government?
You bring up a really good point. Currently, I know we were talking about systems and systematic issues with the unhoused population. Currently, the governmental process for affordable housing is so bureaucratic. There are so many layers of bureaucracy that it takes an individual to go into a housing situation. For instance, for Section 8, oftentimes people have to be on a waiting list for years to get a Section 8 voucher. Once they have that Section 8 voucher, that does not guarantee that they're actually going to have affordable housing. They have to find either a landlord or a HUD housing complex with current availability for them to use that Section 8 voucher. So those are two major obstacles when trying to navigate going from unhoused to stability and being housed.
You know, Dr. Plummer, what are we not talking about here tonight that needs to be discussed?
Specifically around the homeless population, the unhoused population. I think it's the fact that our family systems have changed so significantly. Like you heard the Dr. Donohue talk about a few minutes ago in relation to our environments, it's important for our families to stay intact as much as possible. There's many reasons why people are moving away from their families, their original birth families, but they don't necessarily feel that they can go back home for various reasons. I think that our society has become far too selfish and far too individualistic to even care about other people, and that includes people within their families. I think we need to take some time to readjust who we are as a country, to readjust how we see families, and to also understand the way that economics play a role in that. There's many parents who their family, it feels like it's falling apart and it's disconnecting, and that's because parents are having to work 2 and 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. They have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to make sure that their children can eat, and so they're not at home teaching particular skills, they're not at home increasing particular values, they're not at home just building and being attached to each other. I think that and again, I get to travel the world and think about mental health from different perspectives and different cultural understandings, and I think the thing that we're missing in the United States is good, solid families. Now, the way a family is structured, however it is structured, is between that family, but I do think that children and adults need to know that they have a safe landing space. You know,
Dr. Young, we have seen grassroots efforts arise in response to this crisis, all the things that we're talking about here tonight. Church volunteers, homeless activists, and local government officials all trying to make inroads into this, what is absolutely a growing problem. But with intractable issues like we're discussing here tonight, like drug addiction and mental illness leading to millions living on the streets, what good can these groups do that they have not done or they can do more of?
Well, if we think about the comments that all of our colleagues tonight have made, one is the frustration with depending on the government to be our source of rescue, and I think that's a well-placed concern. So I was talking yesterday to a homeless man who has been who's been 30 years incarcerated and has achieved recent sobriety, and just asked him, tell me about that. Like, how is it that you're running a little gym, teaching Center City kids how to box, and yet this didn't occur till you're 65 years of age? And he made the interesting point that while he's not a religious person, he had what actually was the thing that he thinks as the single variable that affected his move to sobriety and now stability, as Dr. Plummer was just talking about, was the outreach of human beings who, with no other incentive, came to visit him, give him peanut butter sandwiches when he was living under the bridge, blankets when it got to be 30 degrees. And so it occurs to me that these groups are very important in our collective efforts, but somewhere between, as we've heard earlier, somewhere between 25 and 40% of people who are in the chronic homeless group really do have underlying serious mental issues, and those continue to be largely medical issues. That is to say that schizophrenia and bipolar affective disorder require medical therapy, and that therapy is becoming a disappearing parameter here. It's harder and harder to get access to psychiatric physicians. It's harder and harder with all of these barriers. Dr. Plummer was just speaking wisely about the intactness of the family. When one of our family members develops a severe mental illness, and there are all these partitions within the family to discuss with mother and father why son is not leaving his bedroom, why he's become antisocial, and now why he's becoming intermittently hostile. This is simply insane. So if my wife took me to the doctor because I had abdominal pain, we would speak candidly about what it was that likely caused my pain. All these fake partitions that have been put up in the wake of the whole HIPAA issue get in the way of us doing the work that we need to do. And if we're happy enough to have an intact family, as Dr. Plummer just described, let's let it work. It's been the experience that when a bad thing happens, the crowd thins out. With an intact family, it's as likely that the crowd will gather around you and do what we can to aid and abet. But I think we've created barriers that make those loving and supportive, and in these circumstances, essential relationships less vigorous.
He's resonating with you.
Yes, indeed.
Explain why.
Well, because it's true, because we are people born of other people. We are in a womb before we experience the rest of the world. We are around humans. We recognize that a baby is safe when it is with other people, and that doesn't change as we get older. When we are in crisis, when we are afraid, when there are things that are not going well, we're looking for other people to help. I have a controversial relationship with the idea of emotional eating. When I get really deep into it, it's really that somebody wants attention from somebody else. They want a sensory experience. We are constantly craving for sensory experiences of other people, but our society is telling us to be independent, that we don't need those things, that we have to tough through it by ourselves, that the way we are successful is by pulling our own selves up by our bootstraps. Somebody had to buy those boots for you, and somebody had to buy those laces, right? Like, give credit to the fact that we need people in order to be able to maintain our mental health, and stop pushing everyone to be so individualistic that they forget about other people, and that when they need someone, they think that they have to do it by themselves. Therapy is effective because it is with another person.
Samantha, what are some of common mental health conditions you've observed among the homeless population, and how are they often misdiagnosed or untreated? Because, Dr. Donohue and Dr. Plummer alluded to this.
Sure. So 2 out of every 3 individuals who are homeless do have some kind of a mental health condition. However, 20% of homeless individuals have a major mental health condition such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder. And we don't know whether the root of having a mental illness is due to being homeless or if being homeless has catapulted having a mental health issue. I know one of your guests was speaking a few minutes ago about how somebody living on the streets, they have to self-medicate in order to sleep at night because they're so scared of what is going on around them. They could be attacked in the middle of the night, and in order to sleep, they have to take a substance to help them relax.
Wow, so much to learn here. I'm Armstrong Williams. This is Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. We'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, I've got to start the segment here on a feel-good note. I just love the relationship between Dr. Plummer and her father. Her father is here videotaping her while she's on the show. Your father raised you as a single parent.
Yes, my father 100% raised me as a single parent. And this was back in the 80s and the 90s. And so it was very interesting at the time. We didn't see it happen, right? We weren't used to men raising as single parents, and we certainly weren't used to men raising their daughters as single parents. But there was a lot of things that I've learned along the way because my father raised me by himself. He was a soldier, did 26 years active duty in the military through various wars, retired as a sergeant major, and I followed his footsteps and joined the Army for a while as well.
And he gave you
what?
Your salute, your first.
Yes, my dad gave me my very first salute. I graduated from Howard University in the ROTC program. When I came into the military in 2002, my dad was a master sergeant, and he gave me my very first salute. He sure did, and helped me so much through my military career. I was an officer, and my dad was an enlisted soldier, so he trained me in how to be a good officer, how to pay attention to soldiers, and subsequently, when it comes over to my world in mental health, I take those same skills and think about how am I good to people, not just the people who I think have the same education levels as I do or the same socioeconomic status as I do, but everyone, including the populations that we're talking about today, the unhoused populations.
Well, listen, I had to, Dr. Donohue, I come from a family where my mother and father were the best Department of Health, Education, and Welfare I had growing up. And if you talk about a sense of stability and a sense of mental peace and real self-esteem and real self-worth, we forget sometimes how important families that are stabilized and offer support to their children, it lasts them for a lifetime.
You're right, Armstrong, and the consensus that I feel coming up from our group is that there is a core of identity that we gather from our family. The Latins used the turn of phrase, the sine qua non, which is to say, the without which there is none. And I have the sense that when we talk about tangled, complex problems like this, oftentimes biblical truths are of practical utility. Remember that I was listening to Samantha just a minute ago, and John came to mind, you may remember, where Christ laid claim to all people. He said that the will of the Father was that not one of these be lost. So when we talk about homeless people, we're not talking about fungus in your shoe or insects that come through the window. We're talking about our brethren, human beings who from one mechanism or another have fallen into this lot. But I feel like what we lack now in approaching this issue is a sense of courage. Maybe the courage that came from having a father in the military, but we get mealy-mouthed and a little bit underpowered when we take on a big issue like this. I feel like that we need to attack it from all sides. So regarding the mental illness piece of it, I think it's very substantial. I think it's easy to understate it. And I think that most of these folks who are homeless have serious mental illness. This isn't depression or affect. These are burning fires in their inner life. We need to find ways to put them out. We have those means. What we need is the pipes to bring the water from the reservoir to the thirsty population. Mm-hmm. We need to attack it from all sides. And I feel like, that it's been pointed out that the core of our essence, the kind of what we become, is best predicted from where we have come. We're our own agents, we can change things, but still, mother and father are the basic pedestals of our long-term well-being. And God bless our mothers and fathers for having stood tall. We in this generation should do the same.
Phil, talk about, in your line of work, when you see someone overcome, they make it their footstool. What does it take to get that person to the point where they can conquer this? And what does it do for their lives? Because one thing we try to do here, especially on a show like this, is it's so emotional, is also give people hope that they can overcome.
Right. I always say, and most of my patients that I work with get upset about it, that the biggest thing wrong with people is that they believe that there's something wrong with them. And the thought process of how you view yourself has a huge impact on how you interact with the world and what responses you'll see or experiences you'll expose yourself to because of what you believe that you may or may not be worth because of that negative belief you're holding. So I always say unconditional positive self-regard is the biggest step. No matter how I'm showing up, no matter what's happening, even if it is a negative interaction, if it's a negative response, if I'm doing something or producing something that is not equitable with my life experience that I want to have, I'm still lovable. I'm still okay. I'm still a person of inherent worth. I just am not in the situation or producing the type of things that I want right now. And my external does not validate my internal. And because of that, I think the dignity that we hold for ourselves and hold for others is what carries us through the therapeutic process. Mm-hmm. It definitely is the foundation. How you view yourself in relation to your family and the connections you make, because as we've been saying all night, connection is the primary driver for behavior. How you see me is important, right? And I might adjust myself in order to get some love from you, some respect from you, something. And in that process, I might abandon myself because I think that myself wholly isn't worth holding on to. Mm-hmm. And if I let myself go, what door am I opening up for mental health disorders, diseases, or symptoms?
Boy, we have just 4 giants on here tonight talking about mental health. Let me tell you, what a conversation. Samantha, and it brings us to this. What role does trauma play in the overlap between mental health issues and what people play out in their lives through depression, through anger, through loneliness, through emptiness, and then sometimes it leads to suicide?
Sure. Trauma plays a huge role in all of these factors, and there are 3 major portions of the brain that actually play a role in inducing this trauma. That's the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex. And together, these 3 regions of the brain compartmentalize trauma, so people are stuck and they can't get out. And oftentimes what counseling does is it changes that position from somebody being in a situation where they feel stuck to them being unstuck. It changes the narrative of what they think of themselves and in relation to other people in their life. And if we can somehow get to the root of an individual's trauma, whether that's through counseling, whether that's through finding them secure housing, they can be set up for future success.
Dr. Plummer, how do you separate your own feelings to remain the therapist to give them advice, the counsel, because I can only imagine the overwhelming stories that you hear. Yes. And I'm sure that everybody on this panel, at some point, even though you're a therapist, sometimes you need therapy.
Yes. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I have no issue in saying that I experienced therapy myself, and I 100% love it. My therapist knows who she is, and I believe that everybody needs to experience therapy. It is something special and unique and beautiful to sit for about 50 minutes and just talk about yourself and how to improve who you want to be, how to increase your awareness, how to understand the root of some of your issues. And how do I do it personally? I spend a lot of time paying attention to myself. I spend a lot of time paying attention to other people as well. And I'm one of the most selfless people that most people will say, right? But I spend a significant amount of time in a position of self-awareness. As a therapist in general, I recognize that, I see myself rather as a healer. And I recognize that part of my purpose on this earth is to help other people. And the skills that I have and the values that I have and the personality that I have makes me a wonderful therapist. I think this is my gift that the universe has given me. This is the gift that God has given me. And so it's not hard for me to separate my work as a therapist and the human that I am. In fact, there are times where there may be some overlap where I have additional compassion and empathy and understanding because I too have lived life and I understand the hardships that come with that. I understand the insecurities that come with that. I understand the fears of wanting to ask for help. But on the other side, I'd see what help can actually do, how we actually can heal, how we can accomplish and become the dreams that we want to be simply by going to therapy.
And Dr. Donohue, if you could envision an ideal system addressing mental health, what would it look like?
It would be a system that emphasizes in a new way, in a more vigorous and robust way, the people who are most in need of our help, which are people with serious and disabling mental illness. That is in no way meant to discount some of the other issues we've been speaking about. But I feel as if the fire in the kitchen pan that we need to put out with dispatch is some 10 million or so Americans who do have one of these diagnoses that have been discussed, meaning bipolar affective disorder, schizoaffective disease, and severe depression. So I feel those are kind of the orphans of the moment. We've maybe moved into this canopied sense where we've sort of normalized, we've taken normal experiences like, for example, test anxiety and given it a new DSM code. And that's let us focus on things that maybe aren't quite so worthy of our attention. So the system would be, on the one hand, accessible. So if the best book that's ever been written is sitting in a drawer and unread, it's of no value. We have to have systems that are available to people. You know, the wait time now to see a
Dr. Donohue, you know the clock is tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Phil Lewis, Dr. Plummer, Dr. Donohue, and Samantha Silverman, thank you guys so much for being angels in people's lives, and much appreciation and respect. I'm Armstrong Williams. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition.